there in itself, located right across the road at 314 Jefferson Street. For those of you familiar with the wires, the old cafe wires right across the street. 3-story building, all painted white, lots of windows in there now. Historically, it was a furniture store, and then became a nightclub. And then in 2019, we acquired the building and then renovated it over the last couple of years. And now it's enough to have about 72 member companies that started studying that are utilizing the space right now. So primarily, what we focus on are business models that are very scalable and have a lot of high growth potential. So typically, think about like the startup, for example, the angel investor, venture capital funds, run non-traditional, and grow really fast. So really tech startups, but it doesn't have to be that. But we service a lot of different organizations and companies who provide support to small business lifestyle on cost. We do a lot with the arts part program, so a lot of artists. My undergrad degree is in graphic design. I was a touring musician for 10 years, and when I was in public relations, so I worked with artists, like talking to people, and I really appreciate all of our music, design, painting, all of it. So I love working with artists, and I love making sure that you all have the content that you need to be successful. Everybody here, artists, who's here joining for a reason. Just curious. Raise your hand if you're not on. We're not here, but you're yeah, everything. Okay. Yeah. We're here to support them. But today we're going to talk about going viral and making content, preparing to get the most out of your content if it does go viral. How to maybe incentivize ways or like kind of influence your content to go viral or to prepare to go viral. And so before we do the workshop, we're going to talk about the truth about viral content, creating viral content, we'll touch on options for monetizing viral content and protecting your content. And then we'll wrap up with talking, taking the good with the bad. Which still more with like the emotions. And if you're really stressful, have content to viral. And you kind of have to mentally prepare yourself if something does go viral. Because honestly, in some cases, people have had content go viral, and because of like negative content, even though they're just a few, they like kind of want to depression that, you know, and so they did go viral for good reasons, and then it had a negative effect on them. And so the truth about viral content is finding one that's going to be able to hear. But yeah, it's very, very difficult to make viral content or content to go viral, let alone make a life for those that are on online. Cool. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Happy to you want to pass send out the slides to everybody here registered afterwards. Yeah, I'll share those with you. Okay, great. There we go. Let me get clicked up. All right, we good? Can they hear us now? Can you hear me now? Okay, great. So in reality, it's very difficult to make viral content, let alone make a living off of it, right? The best options and the mindset that you should have if something does go viral, or if you're trying to make content go viral, is that you use it to promote your existing work, because you have all of these people coming in and gravitating towards a piece of content that you've created. And if the rest of your content has similar features or it's relevant to that, then you can use that to really promote the rest of your work. And if you're selling individual pieces, or you're doing some sort of entertainment, or you're trying to get them to monetize in other ways, you just use that viral piece of content to just use it to promote your work. That's kind of like the major mindset you should have around content that has gone viral if you're trying to make viral content, is use it to promote your existing work. The other way to really monetize it is, or to have a mindset around like how you could benefit from it really, is develop strategies for monetizing content outside of ad share. So a lot of people think like, oh, I have content that went viral and that's how I'm going to make my money, right? Because all these people are reviewing my content, and because I have it on a channel like YouTube, I can do ad share, which you definitely can make some money off of. But honestly,
even if you get millions and millions of views, right? You stand to only make, potentially less than $10,000. Is a very, 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 very rare case that somebody makes millions of dollars off of one piece of content that went viral, right? And that's like, we're talking hundreds of millions of views to even remotely get close to that, right? To give all of you an example, I had a piece of content that went viral and unintentionally went viral. And it probably now, because it's been picked up by so many different channels, People Magazine picked it up like 3 years after it went viral initially. And honestly, I've only made $300 off of that, right? Now, I wasn't intentional about it. I didn't mean for the content to go viral. So I didn't set it up to really, truly monetize as efficiently as possible. But if I would have set it up correctly and I only would have relied on ad share revenue for that content to go viral based on the views that I could control going directly to my channel, factoring in all that, I still probably would have only made about $10,000 off of it, right? So like I said, you use it to promote existing works or to lead them in to your website or to send them to another location that you can then turn a revenue on in some other ways. But you cannot expect to rely on viral content as a form of making a living. And so another thing you need to think about whenever it comes to content going viral is there's something a lot of startups use. It's called the K factor. And that's really kind of a metric that they say for like, how do you define whether or not something has a strong likelihood of going viral, staying viral for a period of time. And it basically means that the content that you're creating or putting out there has to be, for every person who shares it, they have to be sharing it with more than one person. So that way it stays viral. So it's like, they have to be able to share it with more than one person without any influence of yourself. Literally just like, I saw the content, because of the content, I'm likely to share it with at least another person. That keeps it going viral and sharing with more and more people, right? So your K factor needs to be greater than 1 in order for that content to go viral. Or sustain that. So if you're really trying to create content, this goes more in hand with content that you're trying to make go viral. That's something that you can measure initially to see like how well is it doing, or people organically sharing it with other people and how many people are they sharing it with in order to understand how likely it is to go viral for an extended period of time. All right, so a large portion of this presentation is to talk about creating viral content. And so there was a study done by the Wharton College where they looked at, I think it was like 100,000 pieces of content that went viral by the standard definition of like they saw millions of views within a short time frame of just a few days. And they looked at what are all these pieces of content have in common. And they found 6 factors that they've identified that most of those pieces of content had in common. They don't all have all 6 of them, but they had at least 3 or 4 of the 6. And so we'll talk about those 6 today and ways that you could potentially keep that in mind when creating content. And so this comes from, the study was written into a book by Jonah Berger. It's called Contagious: Why Things Catch On. And it talks about steps, right? And that breaks down into social currency, triggers, emotion, public, practical value, and stories. All right, so we're talking about social currency. And so, like I said, these are things that you want to keep in mind if you want to have your content go viral, or you want it to have a better chance of it going viral, or just having a better organic reach where you're paying, if you're trying to push this out and you end up having to pay for the content to be pushed out, you're getting a bigger bang for your buck, so to speak, because you're not having to pay for every single person it's reaching. You're increasing the chances that people will share this information or talk about this information, right? Because it's still, word of mouth marketing is still 80% of all effective marketing, right? It's not like content ads or online digital ads and all this stuff. It's still people talking to other people and saying, hey, did you see that thing? Or have you heard about this project or anything like that? And I use the fact that like I put this book in this slide as part of that, right? The amount of people that I talk to later after I give a presentation like this and I recommend a book, who come back and say like, oh man, I went out and bought that book, or at least checked it out. It's almost always like 1 at minimum one every other time I give a presentation, right? And it's because you're far more likely to go and look into this book, seeing it in a presentation of me talking to you about the content of it and how valuable it is to you, than if you were to be scrolling through Facebook at 50 miles an hour and you happen to see an ad for this book, you'll probably just scroll right past it, right? All right, so social currency. You want to think about, is there a social benefit to sharing your product or service? And it's really, social currency kind of boils down to the person that is viewing this content. Is there something about the content that makes them look smart, cool, in the know, educated, or funny or humorous or entertaining when they're sharing the content with other people, right? And can you find the inner remarkability? So I'll share the story of Will It Blend. And so the founders of Will It Blend, the original CEO, he used to build motors for like cars, stuff like that. And he was just like, you know what? I think I could build a blender that is extremely strong and could be just one of the best blenders out there. And so he built it, but it was really expensive for him to build. It was a high quality blender, but it was really expensive for him to build. And it was really difficult for him to sell it because you had all these other blenders on the market that were just, cheaper made. And people were just like, it's an obviously lower cost. And so he had a partner who was his CMO, his chief marketing officer, who basically said, okay, I'm going to take $25, $30. I'm going to go to the hardware store and I'm just going to buy a bunch of stuff that I can with this money. And then I'm going to film myself blending it. And then I'm going to throw it up on YouTube and I'm just going to title it, Will It Blend, because I think that would be interesting. And I think people would talk about it. And sure enough, he started blending like baseballs and nails and like glow sticks and just all this random stuff, just putting it in the blender and turning it on and literally asking the question, will it blend? And then people would watch the videos. And everybody like thought this was amazing. Everybody was watching these videos and sharing it, and they were sharing it because it was funny, it was humorous, it was entertaining to see. They just wanted to know what the end result was going to be. Was it going to break the blender? Was the blender still going to be able to work afterwards? What was the thing going to look like once it was blended? They found something that became, it's not like people were going to buy the blender to then go and blend all these things at home, right? But it made it something that was worth sharing. And because it was worth sharing, it got information about this specific type of blender out to far more people without them having to spend very much money on it, right? Literally 25, 30 bucks, and he got millions and millions of views within a couple of days, just off the first couple of videos. So he really was able to figure out what's the inner remarkability about this product and how can we share that with the world. And so another way to create social currency is to leverage game mechanics. So we were talking about this with a startup actually just now on how to gamify their product in order to make it more entertaining or convince people to talk about it more, share, or get more engaged with it, right? And so if you can figure out a way to gamify your product, your art, or whatever, do a scavenger hunts, anything that gets more people involved and gets them talking about it, gamifying things and using game mechanics is a really good way of getting people engaged and talking about something they wouldn't normally see as very interesting or sharing with other people. And then make people feel like insiders. And so, thinking about startups or companies where there's actually one, so I'll use this. Anybody has heard of Mondo movie posters at all? No? So Mondo is an organization in Austin, Texas, and they kicked off with South by Southwest, where they would show movies at South by, but they would use graphic designers to make these really, really cool artistic versions of movie posters for existing movies, like everything from Alfred Hitchcock movies to all the new Marvel movies, Ninja Turtles, all the pop culture stuff, but all the really good stuff that has a lot of like historic value to them as well. And they would just make these really, really nice graphically designed posters that look like works of art rather than the CGI ones that you typically see in the movie theaters, right? And what they did was they do print runs, but the print runs are very, very hard to get your initial run in. So it's like you have to sign up for their newsletter, and then you have to hope that you get an email from them saying, hey, we're about to do this drop, and the drop open time is going to be on Thursday afternoon from like 11:30 to 12. So you got a 30-minute window of getting in there and, you know, clicking the button to get in and pre-order this poster that is going to cost you about $80. And if you don't get in that window, you don't get part of the initial run, then you don't get it. And if you want to buy it later after somebody resells it, you're looking at spending $300+ to get one of these things, right? So being a part of that newsletter, and every time there's a drop, you know, it might not be something that I'm interested in, but it might be something that I'm like, oh, you know, my friend really loves Game of Thrones and they're about to drop this new Game of Thrones poster, you know, so I'm gonna share that with them. And so that's kind of how you make people feel like insiders, is like this information that I know because it's so exclusive or hard to get to. When I do find out the information, I'm much more likely to share it with a bunch of people because it's far more valuable. If you know, if you were able to go to the website and buy posters anytime, any poster that they print anytime, it'd be much less likely that you are going to share that information with other people. And so how do you make people feel like insiders? If you have, you know, if your artwork is like you make paintings or sculptures, you know, maybe you do a private event, it's invite only or whatever, and people are much more likely to talk about it. There was an app that came out during the pandemic where the only way to get involved in the app was, it was called Clubhouse. And the only way to get onto the app was to get an invitation from somebody. And so they only sent invitations out to celebrities at first. And then people were like fighting, like literally like paying people money, like thousands and thousands of dollars for them to just send them an email inviting them to join in the club, right? And then the moment like people started going out in the world again, you know, people cared less about it, you know, because it's like, oh, well, you know, I can go and interact with people and nowadays and everything like that. But, you know, they really said, okay, well, we're going to take the risk of, by not opening it up to everybody and only opening up to people that get invitations, we're going to test it to see if this is something that people would see as like, oh, if I can be an insider, if I can be part of this group, I'm much more likely to talk about it. So they generated a lot of organic traction and reach in word of mouth because they just didn't let everybody in. So triggers. Triggers, I love this part because there's two main parts of it. There's triggers that are organic or natural triggers, and then there's triggers that are a little more forced, where you kind of have to, you know, build up association and recognition by association over time. And so Cheerios is a really good example of this. And so I'm kind of giving away the answer by having the picture up on there. But something they talk about in the book that I think is a really fun story is before they start talking about triggers, they say, okay, Disney World, Cheerios, and Scrubbing Bubbles, right? Those are three brands. And they ask you, which one do you think people talk about the most on a most, you know, common basis, right? And every time I would ask this in a class before I started putting the picture here, almost everyone, 90% of the people would say Disney World, you know, but you have to think about that, okay? How often do people talk about Disney World? It's typically when they first book tickets, you know, and then they'll talk about it on social media and say like, oh, we got our tickets, we got our bracelets in the mail, all that stuff. Then they'll maybe talk about it while they're there, you know, post some pictures and everything. And then they'll wrap up at the end whenever they get back home by doing like a full photo album or something like that to talk about it. So even for the avid Disney World travelers or goers, that's like once every other year, you know, probably more likely once every 3-4 years, right? Is when they're really actively talking about Disney World, or when there's like a new attraction comes up, you know. And then Scrubbing Bubbles, how often do you talk to people about, you know, cleaning your bathroom, let alone what you use to clean your bathroom, right? And so the thing about Cheerios is that by far, out of those three brands, has by far the most word of mouth marketing, is because there's a natural trigger that occurs every single day that once, you know, people are associated with Cheerios, like think about it, it's breakfast, right? You can literally go on Twitter, and if you look at how often Cheerios gets mentioned in tweets, you'll see it skyrocket between like the early hours of like 6 to 8 a.m. in the morning, right? You'll literally see it like peak up and then it'll go down. So that's a natural trigger that they have that's associated that makes it more likely for people to think about Cheerios in a certain time frame. But another thing that they force through association is heart health. So at one point in time, heart health was a big concern, and it should still be a big concern in the US. But there's a lot of news going out about it. There's a lot of research and studies going out about it. So it was naturally something that people were thinking about and being more concerned about. And then they understood that, look, we can help lower cholesterol. So we can piggyback on all of this news that's going out there. And by putting this on our boxes, every time somebody like passes by and sees that frequently in the future, when they're thinking about heart health, they will much more likely be thinking about Cheerios than another brand. And so you want to think about, okay, what is something that happens naturally that we can associate ourselves with or our product with? Like if you paint bridges, I'm just saying, like people that pass over, like I'm from Burbridge. So people that pass over the Burbridge Bridge, the Bayou Teche Bridge over there, if you're an artist that painted a picture of that and you have that in locations that are near there, you're kind of associating yourself with, with that historic monument, and that place. And so like, what can you do to kind of associate yourself something that's natural, or kind of by association, piggyback on that. And so it's not always the easiest thing to do, but the more likely that you are to be connected, or the more frequently you connect yourself to something that people see on a regular basis, once they kind of get used to that, whenever they do see those things, they don't even need to see you anymore. They don't need to see anything about your product. They will just inherently think about you more frequently, but be much more likely to talk about what it is that you're working on or your artwork, because they see it, in public places. So emotions. And this goes more about like how likely people are to share content based on the emotion that it, incurs in them. So, you can see this chart here. It says high arousal and low arousal. So that means that everything in the high arousal column means that if it has that emotional effect on them, they're much more likely to talk about it with other people. If it's in the low arousal column, they're far less likely to talk about it with people. And then if it's in the rows, positive versus negative. Now, it is true. If somebody gets angry at what it is that you've worked on, or gives them anxiety or stresses them out or whatever, they're much more likely to talk about it than if it just makes them sad, or if it's just like nice to look at, right? And they're content about it. But you don't want to get suckered into saying like, oh, well, we're going to do that. I get it. Some artists, like, you want to get that emotion out of them and everything. But on excitement and amusement overall still end up having a higher likelihood of people sharing it, and it doesn't end up kind of cutting off a portion of your potential customer base or people that would want to talk about it. So positivity is really key, but it's understandable that, some people, especially when you're an artist, you want to try and, get a certain emotion out of them. That's one of the bigger, components of art, is to get certain emotions out of people and make people think about things. And so it's completely understandable. But, this kind of goes more in hand with like a lot of businesses, is you want to really do that positive content if possible. So capture and share as many exciting moments as you can. And so this goes something I talk a lot about with like some of the ArtSpark projects is, capturing, it's not just the end result. It's not just your specific artwork. If it's a painting, if it's a sculpture, if it's an event, it's not just that thing that is content that is potentially valuable to the people that you're trying to reach. The process of it all, how you go about creating that, to me, in a lot of cases, even for artists where I'm like, that art is just really not my cup of tea, but how they go about doing that. I don't know how many of you have seen, especially I think a younger demographic probably seeing this more, but like there's all this content on like TikTok. I know my wife's seen it before on Instagram, where it's like the process of making the art is all their content. It's not even just a picture of the artwork. It's the process that it goes through, right? And that to me is, and I think a lot of people, far more interesting than just seeing a picture of the art itself, the end result, right? It's almost like, oh man, like they screwed that up at the end. Almost sometimes it's like it looked way cooler in the middle of the process, but how they did it is really interesting, right? And so you can reach a larger audience as well and get more interest in what it is that you're doing by going through the process, especially if there's something really interesting about it. Like, oh man, that seemed like that was really difficult to do. That seemed like it took a lot of time. That seemed like it was going to look like this at the end, but it actually turned out like this. It was kind of like a surprise at the end. Capturing that type of content and pushing that out and sharing that with the world not only gives you a lot more content to push out and have the chance of it going viral, but it may end up pulling in a lot more people to be interested in what you do, who may not be interested in the end result, but are more interested in the process that you take when developing it. So public, does your product service advertise itself? Okay, so I would love to know what everybody thinks. Somebody please give me an artist, local artist if possible, right, who's done a really good job at making sure that when people see their stuff in public, they know exactly who painted it or who made it. You might want to give me?
Yeah, I was just saying, just said local.
Okay, no, you can, yeah, that's a good example, but local, like, just, I'm curious. Huh? Yeah, Hannah Gumbo. I mean, she's made her style to where I think by now, anytime I see her artwork, I don't really need to see that she signed her name at the bottom of it, really. Like, I've identified with it. But the only way I was able to do that is by seeing her artwork and seeing her name on it, and in public settings, right, where you pass by it very frequently. So she's done a really good job of that, is putting her artwork out in the public. Dirk Guidry did that too, doing murals, those kind of things, and making sure that people knew that it was him doing, documenting the whole thing, pushing that out. So that way, and a lot of these things end up layering on top of each other, right? And so it's like, what is public then helps with triggers, and what is triggers and what is public then helps with social currency and having people talk about it. And so a lot of these things end up layering on top of each other. And so if you can do, and this goes hand in hand with like ArtSpark projects, like if you can do stuff that you put it out in the public and people see, and they see in high traffic areas, and they can go ahead.
I wonder if anybody actually knows what ArtSpark is in this room.
What ArtSpark? Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think that.
Does it? Sorry. Does anybody who knows what ArtSpark is? Okay. Yeah, we got a couple for sure. Yeah. And so the ArtSpark program. When do the? Let's talk about that real quick. So when do the next round of applications go? January.
And the cycle begins in April. So it's an individual artist grant program, stipend, that gives artists an opportunity to make a new work. And Philip Gould, sitting back here, is actually one of our current. So if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I mean, it's a little biased, you know, it's part of the team that that created it, but you know, it's a great project. It's a great program for local artists at all levels. Like if you're just a new artist and you're kind of you know, testing the waters and you have an idea for a project, or you're a very experienced artist and you want to help get funding and support to do a new project, it's a great program because you get a lot of support through it, but you also get some funding to help you pay for the things that you need to get it done. And there's a community aspect in it, so you know, kind of like is giving back into the local community from an artist perspective. And so it's a really great program, and a lot of artists that I've worked with have used that as an opportunity to do this, you know, to do a mural, to do something public, to where people, you know, in high traffic areas, they're going to pass by and they're going to see the artwork, and they're going to get very familiar with their art. So how easy is it for someone to share this, you know, and this goes to social media content, online and offline, right? How easy is it? I would say, I'm trying to think of, there's a couple people who've used as references in the past. You know, I mean, it goes from everything like, you know, if you make like little postcards, right, and you put your art form on that, and it's easy for people to like grab. And Aileen Minute did that, right? She did that over here, and she had her artwork, and it was literally like discount cards, but you could also use it as postcards. So it was really easy for people to pick that up and then share that with other people, right? And you could see like, oh man, this art's really cool. I like that, and I can turn it into a postcard and send it to somebody else who's not in our area. So it makes it really easy for me to share that with somebody who might not normally see her stuff. And then it also has some value to it, because then I can go to these other locations and then use it to get 10% off of XYZ, you know? And so how do you make the private public? Just think about if there's a piece of art that you made and someone bought it and is now sitting in their house, you know, do you have record of what that looked like? You know, are you able to share that? That's the kind of thing. It's like, you don't want to have a really good piece of artwork that sells. That's a good thing, But then it's just like, how do you then have record of that to then show with other people who might make it easier for them to say, oh, I want to have you commission, I want to commission you to do something for me. So you really want to take record of all the things that you have so you can make them public, should they ever not be able to. So practical value, and this is something that we use a lot, is how do you craft content that seems very useful? And I think from an artist perspective, and then for those of you in the room who are not artists or just coming to this for other reasons, just because you want to try and make content go viral, it's really about, okay, what is something that I can create, content I can create for people that's useful, entertaining, educational, or informative, right? And so for us, we create a lot of value that's educational and informative, teaching people the processes for doing things, for starting up companies, for understanding their customers, those kind of things. And we just put that out there. We have a DIY marketing series that literally goes through all the specifics of like content development or media buying or digital marketing, all that kind of stuff. And we put that out there, and that's free. That's free. We're going to push that content out there, and we're going to show you from a customer relationship standpoint that we care about you enough to create something that you find useful, in hopes that you will then view us as an expert in whatever it is, or somebody who's really good at what that is. And so whenever you need that specific thing, you're going to come to us. And so from an artist standpoint, it might be something of like, maybe I create a series where I can do this unique thing, or I take these specific pictures or imagery from lighting and I do how-to videos. Or maybe I just talk more about, like I said, my process, which I think is also entertaining, but can be educational for other inspiring artists who want to follow up your footsteps or want to look for other tips and strategies of how to create really unique art forms. So practical value is something that's really, really engaging for people because they get something out of it first before you ever ask them for anything in return. So what informative, entertaining content can you produce, right? This is from a e-commerce website where they literally told people they had all these free sessions on how to do e-commerce. That's literally what they sold. They sold content and strategies and consulting for building e-commerce platforms, but they gave you almost all of the content, so you felt good about making the decision about what to do. But then when you realize that you couldn't do it all yourself, you'd go back to them and hire them, right? So from an artist standpoint, you're just thinking about, okay, if I have the art form itself, that might be entertaining, sure. But then think about what's something of value that you can use to expand your audience or get more people to talk about what it is that you're doing. Can you do these community workshops, sessions? Is there something that is there a certain sort of process that you have nailed down that you can educate other people on, that you're willing to educate other people on? Is there historic information that you have that can be really inspiring for other people? Or is there stories that you can share with other people that can be inspiring? Think about that, like what other value can you provide to people through your content that's not just the end result of the art? And the last component of it is stories. And so what broader narrative can you wrap your idea in? And when you wrap your idea, the message that you're trying to have people pass along in a story, it puts it in a vehicle that is much easier for people to remember, and then therefore easier for them to share, right? If you just give people information that's like factual or whatever, or you say, hey, this is how I came about to be an artist, and this is when my show is, telling them when your show is factual information, that may or may not be interesting to them. But if you can start off with like, this is why I chose to become an artist, or this is why I'm doing this event, this is what I'm trying to get people to feel or get out of the experience I want them to have, it's much more likely that people are going to remember that component of it. If you can weave in this is the experience I want you to have when you come and see my art or experience my art at the event, then they much more likely to ask you, okay, well, when is it, or where can I see it? All the factual information, and they wrap that into the story. And so stories are just vessels, right, that carry things such as morals and lessons, and morals and lessons get shared far more than just bland data. I use this picture. Anybody know where this picture's from? What movie this picture's from? Inception. There you go. Right. And I use this picture because I think the movie Inception is like by far one of the best marketing movies there is. And it's not because it educates you on how to market. but it's the concept, right? The best way to market to people is to make them think that it was their idea, right? And so when you share stories with people, right, and you bring them into why it is that you're doing what you're doing and why your mission is, and you get them on board, then you're not selling them and saying, hey, you really need to come check out my artwork, or hey, you need to buy one of my pieces or whatever. You're making it to where they can get on board and then decide like, no, I want to be a part of this. I'm choosing to be a part of this because I really relate to this story, or really am inspired by this story, you know? A lot of the artists that I've bought artwork from or have attended their events, I did because I loved the story behind why they created it, you know, and their mission and the passion for the project. And because it makes you feel like an insider in a sense. Like I said, a lot of these things layer onto other components of it. So stories are really, really good. And they're also far more interesting. So if you can create a story out of, you know, your exhibit, then a news channel is much more likely to share it, right? Because it's a story. It's not just like, here's when and where, you know, it's why. You know, it's like, how did this all come about? The why is almost always much more interesting than the normal facts. But if you can get them hooked on the why, then it allows you to then share the facts about when it is or how you can experience it or how you can buy a ticket or, you know, pay for a work of art. Okay, so moving on. So those are the steps. So those are the things to take in consideration before you start to develop a content. You know, you want to think about like, can I make something that has practical value? Can I make something that has some sort of social currency that makes people much more likely to share it? Can I create a piece of content that is public, you know, is easier for people to see or stumble upon, and make sure that people know it was me that created it? So the next thing we're going to talk about is the 19 traction channels. So these are all the channels that you could potentially use to reach out to people, to share your content, to get people to notice that your stuff exists, right? And they all work different at different levels. A lot of people, when they come to us and they say, all right, what's your strategy for getting the word out about this and getting people to be aware of what it is that you're trying to promote? They're like, oh, social media. That's typically not the right answer, right? Because social media, especially nowadays, it's so overcrowded. I mean, organizations with massive budgets, right? Or just kind of overcrowding it, they have the funding that they need to get that repetition, to get all those frequent touch points, to get people to remember their brand or remember what it is that they're doing, right? And it's not to say like social media shouldn't be used by anybody who's like just starting out or starting to promote their stuff, but it takes time to build upon that, and it shouldn't be the only thing that you're using. I tell a lot of people that are just starting out to generate awareness of a brand, to generate, you know, their initial customers, to do things that don't scale. Right. So do things that, you know, take more time, but because they take more time, it's probably more likely that, you know, when you're engaging with the person or getting in front of the person to share with them the information or to try and convince them to attend your thing or to buy your thing or to come and like check out your website, they're much more likely to pay attention. Right. So an example I use is sometimes when we promote events, you know, if social media just isn't working, you know, even if it's a digital event, what I've done in the past is I've literally printed out tickets. I've made a ticket with a QR code on it. You know, it's a physical ticket, something that you would expect to hand off to somebody to gain entry, even though they don't have to do that because there's literally the QR code on it. But the QR code just makes it really easy for them to quickly, you know, snapshot that and then go and register for it. But the physical ticket that we print out and we put it in an envelope with their name on it, and we go to their office or we go where their place of work is and we hand deliver it to them and we invite them personally to attend this event, right? And that is far more likely to catch their attention and remind them as it sits on their desk or they give it to whoever it is that puts it on their schedule. Remind them that they have this thing upcoming and that, you know, because we took the time to go and personally invite them, they're far more likely to attend, right? And so when you're trying to initially build up this fan base or this following or your initial customers, a lot of the times the best ways to get those initial 100, you know, to 1,000 people to notice you and follow your stuff, it takes a lot of like doing things that don't scale. I'll say a lot of when Instagram first started to get really big, and a lot of businesses or a lot of people were trying to like engage and get people to follow their content, the strategy was to literally go and find people that followed other content that was relevant to yours and follow them, and just spend all day following all these other people, because they would get a notification showing that you followed them, which would make it far more likely that they would then go to your page and see what you were about and then potentially follow you back, right? And then you'd go back and unfollow them so you weren't following a whole bunch of people that was irrelevant to you. But that doesn't really scale. It takes time to do and it's tedious, right? But doesn't work so well now, but at that point in time, it was something that worked really well. Something I've seen work well for people is targeted blogs. So especially when you're just starting off, if you can, like I said, if you can make something that has a good story, that has some practical value to it, you can find somebody who writes blogs about art or certain types of art or certain types of entertainment, travel, tourism, stuff like that, and go to them and say, hey, I'm doing this thing, and I've created this story that I think that, would be really easy for you to translate into content that you could then share with all your people. You can either ask them and say, hey, like, I'm not asking you for anything in return other than just write a story about it. You can even give me a completely critical, unbiased, tell me exactly what you think about my art or my content or whatever it is I'm asking you to come and do a completely honest review of it. That's fine with me if that's what it takes for you to share it with your audience. But if their audience is relevant to the content that you're creating, it's a really good way for you to get that initial like 10, 20, 100 followers versus trying to hit them up with social media ads where, like I said, they're scrolling like 50 miles an hour. They're not paying attention. If they're not familiar with their brand, it's going to take, 30, 40 times of them seeing it before they ever think about even clicking on that, right? And so another way to do it is like trade shows. You see that a lot with art exhibits. There's a lot of art shows. I think it's like Big Easel would be an example of like a trade show in this instance, where you can go out there and you can talk to people that would be interested in what it is that you're doing. So offline ads, those would be things like magazine ads, newspaper ads, those kind of things. Speaking engagements, are really good. If there's like an art exhibit or some sort of like art conference or things where you can go and talk about your process of doing things, like I said, it's practical value, but it gets you in front of people that might potentially be interested in what you do. Unconventional PR, that's something where you're like, can I do some sort of event or some sort of like stunt or something like crazy like Banksy? That is unconventional PR, right? He literally would go out and do these things. No one knows who he is and all these things. They would just pop up out of nowhere, and it creates these stories where like people want to share that. And it's just kind of different, right? And email marketing, as you start to get people to sign up for your newsletters or sign up to see your content, make sure that you're using those emails and retargeting those people and connecting with them, right? Because if they took the time to sign up for your stuff, then that means they're far more likely to stay engaged with it. Retaining followers and customers is far easier, than getting new ones. And if you're retaining them, that means you're making them happy. And if you're making them happy, it means they're far more likely to talk about your stuff. Or you're providing them something of value, making them happy. And affiliate programs, it's basically just like, can I partner with another organization and to help promote my stuff? Existing platforms that would be like your own website, things that you owned. Let's see. Search engine optimization, SEO, that's really just like making sure you have enough content where that links back to your website that's out there. And so, and that, targeting blogs and things like that can really help out with that stuff as well. But yeah, so like, these are all the different channels that you can use to reach out to people or get, your stuff out there and gain traction, but they don't all work well depending on where you are, like the stage of, how much of a big of a following you have. If you have a massive following and you already have a lot of brand awareness, then digital media ads or, social media ads might be a better, suit for you because it's scalable. People are already familiar with this stuff. So if they do see it when they're scrolling through their news feed, they're much more likely to click on it. But if you don't, and you're just starting out, then it's much probably much better for you to focus on things that don't scale or a little bit harder, require a little bit more upfront work, but maybe don't cost as much, but allows you to get directly in front of those people that find your content relevant to them. Okay, so options for monetizing content. All right, so you can monetize your video on YouTube with their AdSense program. And then basically is that it's placing ads before, inside, or near your footage. And then payouts in the hundreds for most successful viral videos. Like I said earlier, you can't expect to make a living off of your content going viral, because even if it does, from a successful standpoint, the payouts are in the hundreds. It's really not a lot. And that's what you see, even people that make a living off of, having content on YouTube, right? They typically have all these other revenue streams that they use. Like they have their own clothing line, or they do their own drops, or they have their own website where they sell ads on the website and they're bringing people there, or, people do crowdfunding and they pay for subscriptions, or they kind of, do some insider payouts. And so there's a lot of other ways that they generate revenue, and they just use the YouTube videos to, funnel people to that content. Only rare mega hits make the 100,000 plus, and these typically have to stay viral for a few years to achieve this. So even if you did get to that point, you're making that amount of money over many years, spread out, not all within like 1 year, right? Another way that you can do it is you can license your content to production companies or ad agencies. But there's some drawbacks to this, right? There's some upsides, but there's also drawbacks. It may lock you into very restrictive contracts. So that means that they pretty much, you might license it to them, but if somebody else comes along and wants to pay you to use your content, they might have to go through them to do it and not you, and then it's on their terms, and then you get a small percentage of that rather than the full amount. And then you're likely to pay you pennies on the dollar, right? Because they're really doing all the work to get the content out there and make it go viral, and all that stuff. And they're taking on the liability. They're also kind of going into protection, which we'll get to in a second. But if you do license it, it does make it easier for you to protect it, because you're dealing with these companies that have the money to go and tell people to stop sharing your content when they don't own it or have the rights to it. But at the same time, they're taking in most of the revenue that comes in, not so much you. So that's really good for like those of you that might have some viral content or content that goes viral unintentionally, but it's like really catching on. And you might say like, look, making a few bucks would be nice from this, but I'm not really like depending on it for any reason. You might just go and say, yeah, here, go license it, go, do whatever. I'm fine with that. And if I make a few $100, ooh, that's nice, but I'm not really worried about making any sizable sum of money off of this. All right, so other options for monetizing content. Like I said, licensing agents can shop out, license your content for you, but that's for a fee, right? So you give them control of it, they do all the work, and it maybe make it much more likely that it gets picked up, but at the same time, much less likely to make a sizable amount of money off of it. A really good way to do it is if you have some sort of content that goes viral, and it depends on what the content is, but if you can figure out a way to sell merchandise around it, you're basically just using the viral content as your ad and your brand recognition, and then putting it on other content, something relevant about that viral content on merchandise that you're then selling, and then how are you setting up your connections, right? So what are easy to implement and attractive offers that direct someone to the next content, resource, or conversion? And so this can be done through like native advertising or incentives for sharing. So native advertising is basically something where if I'm on social media or I'm on a channel where my mindset is not to buy or make any kind of conversion, it's just for like entertainment purposes or just for me to kind of see what my friends are up to, whatever. But I see your content and it's entertaining to me. And you might link it to your website where there's more entertaining content or things that are relevant to what I just saw. Then I click over to your website, and then that's when you try to convert me to a sale or some sort of selling a product or whatever. It's not on the social media channel where I'm much less likely to convert because I'm there for a specific reason. You kind of have to lead me down that rabbit hole first, and then sell me on a channel that I expect to be sold from. And then incentives for sharing. It might be a little harder, but you see this, and this is also a way to gamify it too. If you do some sort of contest and say like, hey, share this, or, tag your friends or whatever. And you incentivize them to do that because you're offering some sort of free thing, like free tickets to my event that I'm hosting, or, have a chance to win this art piece that I created. Those kind of things incentivize people to share. And that adds to the social currency, that adds to the practical value, those kind of things. So how are you setting up your connections to make it easy for people to see that initial piece of content, and then kind of go down the rabbit hole, or to make it much more likely that they share it with other people because they're incentivized in some capacity? All right, so talking about options for protecting content. Protecting content is important and tricky. Don't make a restrictive decision that you'll regret later. And that kind of goes hand in hand with, like, if you have somebody that licenses it from you, they have potentially full control. And then you may get a better offer later that you're stuck. And so think about it, though, the longer that you wait to protect, the longer other people have to take advantage of it. And so, like, freebooting is when someone rips content off of the original channel and posts it to another. So that's something that happened to me. Is I posted the content because I wasn't expecting it to go viral. I posted it originally on Facebook, and Facebook doesn't have an AdSense or ad share revenue, at least not at that point in time. And so by the time I realized it had blown up, and then I went and uploaded it on YouTube for me to actually start doing the ad share component of it, there were already so many people that had ripped it and put it into their collage of like video content of like funny things that happened or whatever, or things that were cute and related to pets, because that's what my content was related to, my dog. And so they had already ripped it off, and there was nothing I could do about it because I did not have the funds or the time or the ability to go and search and find all these people and send cease and desist. I just didn't have that at the time, right? And then I ended up licensing it to somebody else who had the ability to control some of that. And then 3 years later, it got picked up by People's Magazine. So then it went viral again for a short period of time. But like I said, it was minimal amount that I made off of it. And not that I was expecting anything out of it. But, if I would have set it up on YouTube to begin with, where there was AdSense, and so think about that. If you really want to make sure that if something goes viral, you're set up, one of the best places for you to start off with, if it is video content, is to start by putting it on YouTube, because once it starts to go viral, it's much easier for you can convert it over and start to get some ad share from it. And then you can start to think about, okay, if you haven't thought about it already, how else can I use this to monetize my stuff? Because you can always link it back to your website, or if you create merchandise around that, other things like that. So it's just, think about where you're putting the content first. If you think there's even a remote chance that it's going to go viral, you can always take it from YouTube and then share it on Facebook too, or share like a smaller, shorter version of it. You can splice up the content, but just keep that in mind where you're uploading it to at first. The owner of the content is now losing out on any potential profits from views generated on another platform, right? Once they rip that content from you and start sharing it on their own, you have no control over anything. They might actually be making ad revenue off of that because they wouldn't put it on there before you start protecting it. So there's pros and cons to like managing it yourself versus licensing it off to somebody else. So like I said, you can sell the rights to it outright, or you can license it to an organization that has the capacity to police the use. Selling the rights outright basically means that you'd have to find somebody who sees it as valuable enough, that thinks that it's actually going to be worth something, but it's going to be one time, they pay you this much, and then you no longer own the rights to it. So if it really, really goes crazy, goes viral, any added revenue that comes in from that afterwards, you have no rights to, right? Versus licensing it, it's, you're not selling it, you're not going to make as much upfront, but, as it starts to grow, your profits grow with it. You can also put your brand or watermark on your content, but honestly, that really decreases the chances of it going viral too. People just kind of like avoid, even if it's really entertaining content, people just kind of avoid sharing stuff that, it kind of has that brand watermark that's really covering everything. And if it doesn't cover everything, all they have to do is like crop the video too. If it's your logo on the bottom right-hand corner or whatever, If they're going to rip it, they're going to crop the logo out or do some Photoshop stuff. And then finally, taking the good with the bad, right? And so really, this is just a short little thing, but I've seen and I've talked to a few other people who have had content go viral intentionally and unintentionally. And honestly, and this kind of happened personally to me and my wife, because my content, my wife was actually like center focus of that. And there were about, within a week's time frame, there were about 30,000 comments on the content, right? And I could say that 29,995 of those comments were absolutely positive, but there were maybe 5 that were super negative because people are just out there just mean sometimes. And it really hit her hard. And I talked to other people who had similar experiences where it was like 3 comments out of 10,000, just somebody coming in there and not knowing who you are, and just being kind of behind the shield of the internet, right? And saying something really negative about your stuff or what's going on in the video, whatever, it can really have a negative effect on you. And so you really, if you're intentional about having your content go viral, you have to be able to handle that stuff, because not a lot of people are equipped to do that. And if you're not currently equipped, then do whatever you can to like just know that they don't know me, they don't know my stuff, whatever, and if it's not positive or it's not some sort of like, utility criticism, something I can actually use to improve my content later on, then you're just going to ignore it, right? But it will happen because there's people out there, especially when stuff goes viral. Nobody can just be happy for other people, right? Not everybody can be. And so you really just have to embrace the positive with it, and just, face the negative, ignore it. And if it is criticism that can be utilized, utilize it, especially if you're trying to do this on a recurring basis and create content that's practical value or useful for people or is engaging with people. If it was intentional, use that to try and improve your content going forward. But just know that I have worked with some people and I have spoken to people who have had content go viral, both intentionally and unintentionally. And you can think like, oh yeah, if somebody says something bad, I'm gonna brush that right off. But it's not until that actually happens where you kind of like understand exactly how you're going to feel about it. So just make sure you understand, because a lot of people can take it really hard, especially when they spend a lot of time creating this content and putting it out there, and they want the world to engage with it and appreciate it for what their intention is. But it doesn't always come across that way for some people. So that is it for this. Hit up the QR code to stay connected with me and Opportunity Machine. But I'm happy to answer any questions. If there's anything I didn't touch on that you had questions around, or if you need better examples about any of the stuff, happy to answer any questions right now. No, but I can talk a little bit about it. Yeah, sure. So Kickstarter and crowdfunding, if you're trying to get content to go viral to help you, so you're asking the question in the sense of if creating content to go viral that helps you then drive more crowdfunding in that sense? Okay, got you. And so you use the same principles here of what I talked about. A lot of times you'll see content that goes viral that helps drive crowdfunding for Kickstarter. The content, there's stretch goals involved, right? And the stretch goals get better and better, so to speak, like as you go through. So if you set it to where it's like, okay, like if we hit this goal within this amount of days, this unlocks, right? So the people that initially funded it or put money into it, they're then incentivized to go and tell everybody possible that might be interested and might put some funds up, so that way they can take advantage of the stretch goals, right? So that's one way to really drive. That's that social currency. It's a practical value. If I share this information with other people, they might think it's cool, right? But it also incentivizes me and gives something of value to me if I'm able to help bring people on to help fund the project. You'll also see a lot of content around like on the Kickstarter like funding page about like the process for like, oh, like this is how we made these things, or this is how, like, I do a lot of research on the board game development, right? Because Kickstarter is like big for that. Like that's pretty much how the entire board game industry is like shifted over to, crowdfunding and Kickstarter to do their initial releases. And so they'll do everything about like the process, they'll do a little video from the founders and like, this is where we came up with the idea, or this is what it's about, like this is the story it tells and all those things. And you're like, man, it's like, it's a board game, like, but there's this whole story, there's this whole, like, it's almost like they turn it into a novel in a sense, like, oh, there's this like dragon and the castles and this whole backstory and everything. And it's something that if you just play the board game, like you'd never experienced, but it's honestly like a piece of content, like a companion content to it, that helps drive that and gets people more engaged and like on board with, like, they feel more like insiders, right? So it's all those kind of things that you can do. Like for Kickstarter, it's like, how do you make them feel like insiders? How do you incentivize them to share it with other people, typically through like stretch goals or things like that? And then how do you put content on there that keeps them on there and keeps them engaged or provides them some sort of value, and sometimes it's literally like, we made this thing, and if you're interested in making something like this, not this, but like this, here's kind of our process for doing that. So it kind of incentivizes people that are trying to do that kind of thing to then share it with other people. But typically it's like the stretch goals, that really incentivize people to share it. You just got to make sure that the stretch goals are good, and also within your budget. A lot of people don't budget for the stretch goals correctly. And so they hit those stretch goals and they're like, oh man, in order to make this component to it, it's like an actual 10% increase on our overall budget versus the anticipated 5%, because they didn't do the proper like manufacturing costs in estimate. They did not. So yeah. Another question? Did you have one?
No, I was just thinking about how there are other crowdfunding platforms that operate different
Yep.
to Kickstarter and don't require to stay with a minimum goal.
Yeah, minimum goal. And then a lot of people are kind of cheating the system now. A lot of those too is they'll set the minimum goal super low to make sure that it gets funded. But if it doesn't really hit a threshold for them, like, so like, let's say they set the base of 20,000 and it doesn't actually hit like 100,000, they'll just cancel the project because it's not worth them actually following through on it. But they do that because it helps them in the ratings and everything if it gets funded. So it's much more likely to go up and be seen and get shared.
That goal with, if they're not reaching their goal, but they could still use like some of that money, then they will top up the goal themselves. So they out of their own funds add to it so they can reach that goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can set up stretch goals a couple of different ways now. But it's almost always like where it becomes a huge pain point for the developer, whoever's putting it out there, is they just didn't budget correctly for it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's an educational thing. They gotta like set up a profile. They gotta understand like, and then I was actually somebody I was just talking to about it. They have a product that they already built, but it's in the like hunting industry, and they're like, I'm thinking about Kickstarter. And I'm like, okay, well, first of all, you need to make sure that hunting items have successfully been sold and started on Kickstarter, because if no one's ever sold, like there's a lot of products that have never been, put on Kickstarter and like funded, so you have to make sure that your demographic is familiar with the platform and has used it before and, has some evidence around that. And so, yeah, it's something he's been looking into. So you can't just assume that anything that you are making product wise, you can go to Kickstarter and your customer base is like going to be able to like use it or want to use it. Right. Yeah. It's an educational hurdle on that, for sure. And then it's like, wait, you mean to tell me I'm not going to get this for 2 years, like in some cases. And, that's really where you're like, well, who's my early adopters? Who's like willing to spend money on this now because they see the true value in it? They're fine with getting it later, Yeah. Any other questions?
I got a comment just
Sure.
to contribute to the conversation. A lot of good information.
Thanks.
I had a photo of the fire,
Mhm.
and just to give you guys an idea, I came in here thinking like, what did I do wrong because I didn't make a penny on this?
Mhm.
I had a reporter from the Independent. You guys know what that is? It's the biggest media outlet in Indeed.
Mhm.
The reporter reached out to me and offered me £47 to print it. This, we're talking about a picture that went from Lafayette, Louisiana to England,
Mhm.
and they offered me $47 to print it. So I came here thinking like, what did I do wrong? And I honestly couldn't figure out the reason, but I couldn't think of a way that I could have done something different to make money on it. I wasn't intending for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't my purpose. It was unintended. But even locally, you know, I didn't sign the contract to print the picture locally. I let them print it, but I didn't sign it because so I didn't sign the contract and let them print it regardless, just so that it could gain some traction here.
Yeah.
But I will say this, that a lot of stuff we're talking about, the stuff that I'm currently doing to try to leverage to increase the value of my business
Mhm.
and connect my name with the picture, because the picture was out there, but how many pictures do you know from the photographer?
Yeah.
Next to none.
Yeah.
Even as a photographer, there's a lot of pictures that I see,
Mhm.
I don't necessarily know who they are.
Yeah.
So now I'm working on attaching my name to that picture to increase the value of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a solid point of like, how many, do you know who the person is that captured that video content or the picture that you see on the news, right? And honestly, there was, I think Netflix actually helped with that slightly because there was that like docuseries on the people in Los Angeles that would go and chase these news stories and try and capture the content and then hurry up and sell it to the news channels. And then I know a lot of people specifically that watch that and we're like, oh yeah, man. Like, I always wonder, like, when you see that little like name or Brandon thing, like just pops up randomly on this video or like whatever on the news, like it's just another organization that captured that and then sold it to them. But even that's like, that's not something that people are looking for, so they're not gonna, it's not, you can't really say just because this went public, right? Kind of going back to the public thing and my name was on it real quick. It has to be something that's like very easy for them to identify that you were the photographer for this photo. But yeah, I know it's probably not something that everybody wanted to hear, but if it makes you feel any better, like I said, it's really, really hard to make a living off of anything. And even something that goes insanely viral, you make a couple $100s off of.
And also, I posted on Facebook and people took the photo on Facebook.
Yeah.
My picture went viral on Twitter and Reddit at the same time.
Yeah.
And I didn't even have a Reddit account. So I had to create an account, ask the moderators to give me photo credit, and I had to reopen my Twitter because I never used it. I went from having no followers to 300 in a day.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I didn't even know how to use Twitter. I had to have somebody explain to me what to do.
Yeah. I know. I had whenever our content originally went viral, I had all these people, me and my wife just had all these random people adding us as friends, and like, why? Why? I don't know you. Like, great. I know that you love dogs clearly from your profile picture. That's nice or whatever. But if you're thinking that like I'm some sort of dog influencer, like it's not the case, So I'm just like, I'm sorry, but I'm like denying all these people, friends. And it's just all these unexpected things. It's almost like, man, like, there's benefits to your content going viral, but it's surely not like a direct monetization, at least, And honestly, there's a lot more pain points that come with it that you don't think about. It's just like, well, now I got all these people, like I literally walking in PetSmart and I had somebody who's like, oh my God, like that's the Corey from the video, and like want to pet my dog and everything. And I'm just like, I'm trying to like get to the groomer so I can go somewhere, but I don't want to be like mean and like tell you to go away or whatever. It's just kind of a lot of unexpected things. And like I said, you have to take the good and the bad. You have to be prepared to take the good and the bad with it, because the good is not really direct profits off of it, But being able to use it as a way, because people are coming in, and clearly somehow identifying, that you're the one that took the picture, and that I was the one that's standing off camera, somehow they're coming in. So it's like, how do you redirect them to something that you can monetize? And having that prepared ahead of time before content goes viral allows you to immediately jump on it and like push people. So even if people are like ripping your content and sharing it elsewhere, how do you then follow that stuff and then go on like, oh yeah, if you want more, go to this website, or you want to, whatever. and allow them to then help you push that more, because you're not going to monetize it. That's from based on the content at least. So yeah, it's I know I thought about this as I was putting it all together. I was like, man, I hope no one's like showing up thinking like, oh man, I'm gonna make viral content like my living, because I got all these pieces. I know it's gonna be, awesome. No, there's so much more involved in that, so much more involved.
What about at home people think that this is very informative, and she's at home watching it with her dog as well. So
Okay. All right, I will say this. There was it's something about pets, man. There's this company called Divvy Up, and they do customized socks. And so I was talking to the COO last year at a conference, and he was telling me about their story about how they literally spent their whole thing was like, you buy a pair of socks and we donate a pair of socks to homeless, right? And so that's originally how they started off with everything, and that was like their main value proposition. And then they spent 3 years going to farmers markets, trying to convince people to like buy socks, trying to sell these socks and everything like that. And then they just realized that like, man, people like are bringing their pets. People keep talking about like, oh, they like to, to have these, there's like other products that were going out, like these pillows, you could have your pet's face on it or whatever. And then they were like, what if we made socks, customized socks, and we allowed you to put your pet's face on it, And as soon as they put that up on the internet, where you could put your dog or cat's face on a pair of socks and just order one pair, they blew up. Now they do all kind of custom socks. They're literally like, their average orders 1.5 pairs of socks, right? That's like how customized they are with their socks. But the thing that made them go viral was the fact that you could put your dog's face on a pair of socks. I mean, it's just, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely different. And I see one of my favorite memes about pets is in the very, 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 very far future, like when everything is like, just diminished and it's almost like ancient ruins, people are, the whoever the culture is at that point in time is going to see all this content around cats and think that we worship them as gods, right? They're like, man, it was the obsession with cats. But yeah, it's something about that content. And actually they say that in that book in Contagious. They're like, here are all the things that we saw in common about stuff going contagious, except for videos about cats. We still don't understand that. So, but yeah, like I highly recommend that book, Contagious. All of these points, honestly, like you can go through any piece of viral content and probably identify like, yeah, there was these 3 components of that. And I have seen a lot of startups use this. And it's not to say that your content's going to go super viral, but like I said, going to that K factor, right? It's about, can you create a piece of content that is going to have one person share it with at least 1.5 or 1 plus one more person. So that way you get far more organic reach out of it, and it's less that you have to spend on like marketing to people, right? You get that organic growth. And so it typically goes into, these 6 factors, Any other questions? Any questions about like these components or anything at all? Yeah, I think practical value is one of the easier ones to kind of like get around and say like, what can I create a value that's like educational, informative? Emotion, I think emotions are a little bit harder, and sometimes it's really hard for people to like do stories, but like I think a lot of creative people can, wrap their message into a story. And so, some are easier, I think, for others to like identify and like figure out. But like triggers, one of them is like Kit Kat bar. I didn't even know this was a thing until I read the book, but apparently Kit Kat, they have the slogan of like, give me a break, right? Well, when you think about like breaks, what else is something that is like kind of associated with breaks? What's that? Rest? Okay. What's like a product? Man, no one's a coffee drinker in here? Like coffee breaks. All right, so like they're like, oh, coffee breaks, right? And so like, people take coffee breaks in the afternoon sometimes. And so they had a big campaign that went out that said, when you take a coffee break, grab a Kit Kat. And their revenue like shot up, like they were selling Kit Kats like crazy. And it's like you wouldn't really think like coffee and Kit Kats or whatever, but it's just that term break, really. It wasn't necessarily saying that like people were drinking coffees and eating Kit Kats at the same time. It was just they found something else that occurs naturally to associate their product with, that made people think about it, a lot more. But yeah, that's it. Thank you. Yeah, it's not it's like I said, it's definitely one of the harder things to do is to make a piece of content go viral, and then monetizing it. You really try and set it up, but I hope that all of you can at least think about, if I did have something go viral, how would I set it up, and at least be able to, like, when you start pushing content out there, have it set up in a way where you can make the most profit from it possible, even though it's not going to stand to make a ton of direct profit. But if you can have other channels and other connections that can lead them to other products that you sell or other things that you can generate revenue from, then that'll help out a lot. And yeah, and it's really a risk too. Honestly, the licensing your content thing, that's kind of more for like, you have something that goes viral accidentally. You just say like, look, a few bucks would be nice. I don't want to deal with it. Here you go. But if your intention is to make things go viral, then set yourself up to handle that yourself. There's companies that you can literally Google search, like, licensing media companies, that license viral content, things like that. You can find a bunch of them. It's been so long. Like I try to remember, go back and remember the one that I licensed it to. But they weren't a licensing, they were a licensing agent. So they actually didn't license it. It's just they had an agreement with me that they would then go and license it to other organizations. And one of those was like People Magazine. And so, but you can literally just do a Google search. There's so many of them now, because there's just like so many ways that you can create content, and share it now. So anyway, thanks for coming out, everybody. I appreciate it. Yeah.
The next one after that is about meeting your local funders. So if you're looking to get a grant for something, come to the session from the vendor first, and it's a free session. It's local and national funders will be available to chat to you about opportunities that are coming up. So and I'll email for the recording and the fresh to
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, we're kickstarting it.
Oh, awesome.
And it's no, Kickstarter's got those rules where you have to go through Kickstarter. And I have friends, when we get you?